Good morning and welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission's administrative meeting for June 17th, 2020. We'll begin by approval of the minutes for our last meeting on June 10th of 2020. The vote begins with Commissioner Richard.
I vote aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
And Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
I vote aye. The meeting minutes are approved. Secretary, the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, there are 3 items on today's consent agenda. Item number 1 is Earthlink Business LLC's notification of name change and replacement tariffs. Item number 2 is PEG Bandwidth Maryland LLC notification of participation in additional financing agreements. And item number 3 is a request to cancel the electricity and gas supplier licenses of East Coast Power and Gas of New Jersey LLC, DBA East Coast Power and Gas.
Thank you. Do commissioners have questions on any of these consent items? Seeing none, I propose that with respect to item number 1, we note the name change, we accept the tariff revisions for filing, and we direct the company to file clean copies of the revised tariff sheets with an effective date of June 17th, 2020. With respect to item 2, that we note the company's participation in additional financing arrangements, and with respect to item number 3, that we approve the cancellation request. The vote begins with Commissioner Richard.
I vote aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
And Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
I also vote aye. The motions are approved. Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, item number 4 on today's administrative agenda is Chesapeake Utilities Corporation's application for authority to exercise a franchise to provide natural gas services in Somerset County. On this item today, we have for staff Lloyd Spivak, Lucy Shea, and John Clemenson. For the company, Brian Quinn, Shane Brakey, Dean Holden, Matt Everngam. For Sierra Club, Susan Stevens Miller, and for Office of People's Counsel, Fred Hoover.
Thank you. We'll begin with a presentation by staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Lloyd Spivak for the Commission staff. This is Chesapeake Utility Corporation's application for authority to exercise a natural gas service franchise granted by Somerset County. The Board of County Commissioners of Somerset County granted the franchise by an agreement dated December 10th, 2019. Under Public Utilities Article Section 5-201, the Commission may grant authorization for a public service company to exercise a utility franchise. The standard for granting Commission authorization to exercise a franchise is whether doing so would serve the public convenience and necessity. The franchise agreement grants Chesapeake a franchise for 25 years, which is exclusive for at least the first 3 years. After that period, Somerset County may revoke exclusivity if Chesapeake is a non-performing franchisee, meaning it has failed to install gas distribution infrastructure in the county capable of serving economic projects consistent with the franchisee's tariff on file at the Maryland PSC. Chesapeake was selected to fulfill an RFP issued by the Maryland Environmental Service to provide natural gas service to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore and to the Eastern Correctional Institute, 2 large state facilities in the vicinity of Princess Anne, Maryland. In order to do so, Chesapeake will expand its system southward along the U.S. Route 13 corridor to serve these facilities, and in doing so, will provide the opportunity for other businesses and residences along the corridor to obtain natural gas services. Chesapeake's calculations indicate that even just providing service to the 2 state institutions will provide a return sufficient to meet the economic test set forth in its tariff, meaning that the anticipated revenues warrant the needed investment. Somerset County has filed a letter in support of the proposed gas expansion, and OPC has also filed in support of staff's recommendation that Chesapeake be authorized to exercise the franchise granted by Somerset County. Given the Maryland Environmental Service's sponsorship of the gas expansion project, their endorsement of Chesapeake's request is also more than implicit. The Sierra Club has filed a letter in opposition to Chesapeake's request, apparently out of concern that gas expansion will lock in long-term use of additional natural gas. Staff notes that until such time as a much larger proportion of Maryland's electricity fuel mix consists of carbon-free renewables, using even the most efficient electric heat pumps to provide heat will use considerably more gas and produce more carbon than the direct burning of gas to provide heat, given the amount of gas and coal in Maryland's existing fuel mix and the relative inefficiency and high carbon emissions of burning gas, let alone coal, to generate electricity. To the extent that the Sierra Club claims that allowing the gas expansion in Somerset County violates state policies regarding the development and use of renewable energy in the state, the active sponsorship of Maryland Environmental Service suggests otherwise. Denying the request, as the Sierra Club asks, would essentially substitute that organization's judgment on the economic and environmental effects of the proposed gas system expansion in place of the judgments of the parties whose direct interests are most affected by the project, including Somerset County, the two state facilities, Chesapeake, and the Maryland Environmental Service. On balance, staff is persuaded that authorizing Chesapeake to exercise the franchise granted by Somerset County will serve the public convenience and necessity. Staff therefore recommends that the Commission authorize Chesapeake Utilities Corp. To exercise the franchise granted by Somerset County.
Thank you, Mr. Spivak. We'll now turn to counsel for the Sierra Club.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This is Susan Stevens Miller. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Ms. Miller.
Thank you. I'm representing Sierra Club today. We respectfully request that you deny Chesapeake's application. First, I take issue with Mr. Spivak's characterization that you would be accepting our position over these other entities. What we are asking you to do is look at the public convenience and necessity, which none of the other parties are required to do. The county is not required to look at public convenience and necessity. The state agencies who develop the RFP are not required to look at the public convenience and necessity, and exercise your judgment and determine that this does not fit the public interest nor the public convenience and necessity. And there are several reasons for this. First of all, the argument that Chesapeake makes with regard to economic benefits in this application is simply incorrect. They rely on 5-year-old data. They the RISI study itself does not support that there will be growth in Somerset County. It suggests that there will only be 7 commercial entities and only 2,000 residential entities, and that includes conversions and new construction. So the economics simply aren't there. Furthermore, it's not the least cost option. Several studies since the RISI study have found that the cost of the heat pumps have gone down and the heat pumps have become more efficient. The cost of renewables is dropping, while Chesapeake argues that gas is supposed to remain stable for the next 10 years. Stable does not compare well with other forms of energy when those forms of energy prices are also dropping. We also dispute the characterization of the PJM market as being dirty. Essentially, it's getting cleaner all the time. And moreover, the Commission has to consider that this is an investment for 40 years in gas. So the fact that staff considers PJM to not be very clean today, it's progressing towards cleaner, whereas gas, the methane level of gas will remain the methane level of gas. So this is an extensive commitment that the Commission is making to continue to use gas in Maryland. And that commitment is contrary to the statutory mandate that GHG emissions drop 40% by 2030. That's less than 10 years. We cannot achieve that objective by increasing the amount of GHG emissions in Maryland. Second, the Commission really should consider the real risk of stranded costs. We respectfully disagree with OPC that there is no risk to ratepayers here. Essentially, if this investment is made, the investment will be depreciated over, or Chesapeake will get its return on its cost, capital costs over 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. We will not be using gas in 30, 40, or 50 years, or we will not have achieved our climate objectives. So there is going to be a moment in time where we stop using gas and companies like Chesapeake have not recovered their money. So what happens to that unrecovered cost? And that's going to be a burden either on the ratepayers or on the taxpayers or some other entity. And the commission needs to determine in advance what's going to happen to those costs before it allows more costs to be spent. Stranded costs need to be addressed proactively. Third, as I've mentioned, that this is inconsistent with Maryland's statutory climate policies. GHG emissions are required in Maryland to go down, not up. This would increase the GHG emissions in Maryland for the foreseeable future, being directly contrary to that statute. What we suggest the commission do is either reject Chesapeake's request to exercise its franchise or hold it in abeyance. Holding it in abeyance would enable you to take our suggestion that the commission conduct a holistic proceeding that looks at gas utilities in Maryland, looks at what their business model should be to keep them in business and to achieve the 40% reduction. And then once that decision is made, Chesapeake can determine and the commission can determine if it makes sense to go forward with Chesapeake's request. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Counsel for Office of People's Counsel. And Ms. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, the Office of People's Counsel did file a letter not opposing the expansion of natural gas service into Somerset County by Chesapeake Utilities. And we based that on the review both of the application, but also specific questions we asked of Chesapeake regarding the intention of what they wanted to do. And
Excuse me, counsel. Could you identify yourself? I don't know who's speaking.
oh, my name's Fred Hoover. I'm with the Office of People's Counsel. Commissioner O'Donnell. The Office of People's Counsel reviewed the application and asked specific questions of Chesapeake about their intended service into Somerset County. And to our view, this is mainly being driven by the RFP that was issued by Maryland Environmental Service to provide natural gas service to University of Maryland Eastern Shore and the Eastern Correctional Institute. So the concern that has been raised about this sort of speculative nature of the natural gas expansion into Somerset County, we are not as concerned about because of the direct connection to these two specific projects. And Chesapeake, in their responses to us and our data request, indicated that they were applying the commission's economic test in evaluating the expansion of the service, the cost of the expansion of the service, and the revenues anticipated from extending the service to these two particular customers, and that would offset the cost and be in accordance with the commission's economic test. The other issue that we raised with them was a specific question about the impact on the current ratepayers of Chesapeake. We've had concerns about other proposed expansions of natural gas service by other companies that caused an impact to current customers of those companies, and Chesapeake assured us that there would be no impact from this specific project. So I think the concern that this is just a speculative expansion of natural gas service into a new area that may lead to stranded investment is not present in this particular situation. Now, regarding the situation of whether or not this is counter to state policy, the Maryland Environmental Service, a state agency, put out the RFP and requested proposals for the energy concerns of both the college and the correctional institution. Chesapeake made its submission to MES. MES accepted it. So the state seems to be on board with this particular expansion of natural gas service. So we think in total, in looking at all of the factors involved in this particular application, we concur with staff's recommendation to approve Chesapeake's application.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Finally, we'll hear from the utility.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. It's Brian Quinn here today on behalf of Chesapeake Utilities. I have representatives from the company here to answer any specific questions that commissioners may have. I'll try not to repeat any of the arguments you've already heard. Chesapeake obviously agrees with staff recommendation here that the commission approve its application. There's a specific law and regulation that governs the commission's review of an application to exercise a franchise here. And as noted in staff's comments, Chesapeake's application satisfies the specific statutory and regulatory requirements for approval. On the point of the Sierra Club mentions their argument that it's not in the public interest to exercise this franchise. I agree. A pretty good indicator of it being in the public interest, or whether the state of Maryland considers this project in the public interest, is the fact that the state issued an RFP for the ECI and UMES project. Another strong factor indicating this application is in the public interest is that specific finding by the Somerset County Commissioners. Let's not forget the local government representatives charged with representing their constituents in Somerset County strongly support this application, and they believe it's in the public interest for this commission to approve it. Sierra Club doesn't even mention the Somerset County Commission letter. And finally, just on the low cost option and their environmental arguments, Chesapeake's application includes more than just the Towson study. It references the EIA data that shows natural gas is going to be cheap for a while. Natural gas is certainly cheaper than the current fuel sources currently serving ECI and UMES. They're served by propane, fuel oil, number 2 and number 6, and wood chips. Believe it or not, there's a wood chip fired boiler down that's been serving the prison for over 30 years. And the prison decided, along with the state, that it's time for that thing to go. And they chose natural gas. And natural gas has the economic benefit, development benefits that are noted in Somerset County's letter as well. As far as the environmental benefits here, Sierra Club fails to mention that the natural gas here will be replacing the much dirtier fuel sources that currently serve those institutions: propane, fuel oil, and wood chips. Not to mention the diesel trucks that deliver the propane, fuel oil, and wood chips to those facilities will now be made obsolete and taken off the roads as a result of the expansion here. This franchise application has much more solid evidence of customer protections than any franchise I've seen in the last couple of years. We've got a RFP with the state of Maryland that demonstrates this project is economic. In many cases, commissions asked to exercise a franchise application in areas where the utility believes they have some customer interest. I mean, we have some documented solid customer interest here. We think the application more than satisfies the applicable law and regulations. We'd respectfully request that you approve it. Here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. We'll begin with questioning by the commissioners. Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This would probably be both for the company and for staff. I just would like to understand whether or not this application is necessary or not to proceed with these 2 projects that have been identified, both for the University of Maryland and Eastern Correctional Facility. This company, Cambridge, it was Cambridge Gas, and now it's Chesapeake. Don't they already have a franchise with the state of Maryland through the legislature and with the commission? And with the consent and with the approval, I don't know what exactly the right term is, of the county, couldn't they proceed with not only these 2 projects, but other projects with not Cambridge, Chesapeake Gas? So, maybe I just get from staff and then from the company what their thoughts on that are.
From staff's perspective, Commissioner, there is a statewide franchise for gas companies, but generally speaking, the companies are expected to get a local franchise as well from the local governing authority, usually the county, sometimes it's a municipality in the area they are seeking to serve. And that is normally what the commission would grant its approval to or authorization to exercise that franchise that the local authority has granted. And to now, Chesapeake has had local franchises from other jurisdictions on the Eastern Shore, but not from Somerset County. At least that is my understanding. Mr. Quinn can elaborate further.
Yeah, no, I would like to, because I did ask our Office of General Counsel here at the Commission, and at least the answer I got is that because they already have this, franchise from the legislature and from the Commission, that this isn't really a necessary requirement at this point from Somerset, as long as the county agrees. But anyway.
Commissioner Richard, it's Brian Quinn on behalf of the company. Thank you very much for reading the tail end of our application. I appreciate it. Yeah, and that's the reason I threw in that discussion about Chesapeake holding a statewide franchise here. We do. But however, the law requires not only that you have a franchise, but that you have the local governing authorities consent to exercise that franchise. And here, the letter and the actual franchise from the county is considered that consent from the local governing authority. But you also need this commission's approval to exercise it. So we do need the approval to exercise in a jurisdiction. Even though we have a statewide franchise, we do need the commission's approval to exercise that franchise in a jurisdiction in which we have not exercised it previously. And we will be introducing natural gas to Somerset County here for the first time. And therefore, we needed the commission's approval to exercise our franchise in the county.
Okay, so you are saying that you could not proceed then with these two projects, ECI or the University of Maryland projects, without an action today or an action from the commission at some point?
Yes, under section 5201, I think we need the local governing body's consent and then the commission's approval to exercise. So it's two steps. But I put the description of the statewide franchise in for the commission's information. It wasn't contained in prior commission dockets. And for the future, just wanted the commission to know we have this authority and wanted to make the record complete in front of the commission once and for all.
I would also just note that staff would be a little concerned with the commission essentially ruling that it doesn't need to authorize a utility to exercise a local franchise because that franchise might have a statewide franchise, with the possible exception of in the telecommunications business. That would probably not be a good precedent for the commission to set.
Okay.
It's Brian Quinn again. The last point on this, Commissioner Richard, because I want to just make sure I'm clear with you. There's a Court of Appeals case here that is consistent with what I'm saying to you. Even though a utility has a statewide franchise, they still need the commission's authority to exercise it in an area they have not exercised it before. And I can give you the site to that offline, or I can send it to the executive secretary. That's sort of the state of the law on franchise.
Okay, so at the county level. Okay. Mr. Spivak, you talked a little bit about state policy, and you specifically point to MES. Is MES a policy-making entity for the state? And how do we reconcile if MES seems to be kind of, if they are at odds with another entity, MDE, as Sierra Club, indicates?
Well, I would not say that MES is a policy-making entity per se, but it is tasked with carrying out what it sees as being state policy. And I would note here that in this case, there is no conflict between them and MDE, or at least MDE has not indicated that there is any kind of a conflict here, or that they have any objections to the proposal to extend gas service into Somerset County.
Did you ask them?
I cannot say that I asked them. No, staff, we did not ask for the input on this particular.
Yes. So you're just
application.
basically resting this on that MES issued the RFP under it's the way it functions, but not that and other state agencies were sought to give opinions on this question.
That's a fair statement, Commissioner.
Okay. If I think that may be it for staff. I did want to ask OPC, you, Fred Hoover, you and Mr. Hoover, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Yeah. I just in the pay it forward application that we're considering, OPC did seem to have concerns about state policy conflict, and I think did reference MDE. Is it just the same kind of question? Do you believe MES has that standing as a policy-making entity in the state that we could rely on to again make this jump that this is consistent with state policy, just because they issued an RFP?
Well, I think that MES has been looking for energy solutions, particularly for the prison, for quite some time. As Mr. Quinn indicated, the current infrastructure that supplies the prison is relatively out of date, and I know from previous service in state government that they've been trying to find a solution down there for quite a while to eliminate what are currently more polluting sources of energy, particularly for the prison. So, I mean, it strikes me that MDE should be aware of the applications that agencies like MES and others are putting out there. And if they had a concern about this being counter to the state's policy regarding clean energy and emissions reductions, that they were in a position to say something to the commission about it. And as Mr. Spivak noted, there's been nothing from MDE about it. Now, maybe nobody specifically asked them, but they are aware of proceedings that go on in the front of this commission all the time. So it seems to me that if they didn't say anything, their silence means that they don't seem to have any particular concerns with this specific application for natural gas service.
I would also put MEA in that situation as well. I mean, MEA follows what happens at the commission very closely, and they also have not expressed any objections to this application.
Okay. And then Mr. Hoover, just with the state legislature, and they have been very reluctant, or I guess they haven't authorized MEA at this point to spend any of the gas expansion funds. Do you have any concerns that, again, the fact that they have been silent, they've actually, said, no, you cannot use these funds for gas expansion, that would indicate any type of conflict with state policy?
Well, there again, I mean, MES's budget goes through the state legislature, and so the funds to pay for this project are going to eventually come out of state revenue. So it would seem to me that the General Assembly has either reviewed this this proposed project and has granted its approval to it, or if they decide they don't like it, I'm sure they won't hesitate to deal with it in the next review of the budget next session.
Okay, well, fair point on that. All right, I think, yeah, those are all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do commissioners have additional questions? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Miller, I wanted to ask you, the assertion that you make that this project will violate state policy, do you believe that we should not supplant even more polluting sources? Does the Sierra Club believe we should continue to use those dirtier sources of heating at these facilities, more harmful to the environment? You believe that that's what state policy is? You're muted.
Is something that will last 40 years.
Could you start over?
A temporary fix. People treat it as a transition. It's not a transition. It's something that's going to be in the ground and paid for 30 or 40 years. We need a more thoughtful way to replace the propane, the wood chips, and other things. We agree they should be replaced, but they should not be replaced with another source of GHG emissions. That just doesn't make, particularly a source that's going to be there so long. It just does not make sense in the long term, which is what the commission needs to be considering. And if the commission doesn't to point out
I know
something,
that's your argument.
excuse
I
me,
know that's your argument, but I'm trying to ask you something else. Do you believe that that is state policy?
do I believe it? I believe it is state policy to not encourage or expand gas in Maryland. That is a state policy. Is what
Okay, so
he
now
has
we're getting
expressed.
to the number. What I'm trying to ask you, where is that stated?
That is stated in the MDE draft report about implementing the GHG emissions law that says it has to be reduced by 40% by 2030. So MDE is.
That's not out of one.
I'm
That's
sorry,
not
sir.
out of one sector, right? It's not just heating. It's not just transportation. It's not just utilities. It's not just manufacturing. It's across the state, and it's net reduction, right? It doesn't specifically say you can't expand gas usage in the state of Maryland, does it?
The statute does. MDE specifically says that gas should not be expanded in Maryland. The statute does not say.
But
Statute leaves it to the agencies to determine how to achieve the 40% reduction. And MDE has specifically said gas should not be expanded. That
could you cite
away from gas.
where MDE? Could you
Sorry,
cite
sir.
where MDE specifically says where we can't expand gas? Because I haven't seen that written.
I believe it was in our comments, but I will certainly send you a letter right after this, which illustrates where MDE has said that.
Because this commission has authorized gas expansions. As part of the Alta merger with Washington Gas, we set up a fund administered by the Maryland Energy Administration. And although there's been budgetary action to hold that expansion, I don't believe that there's state policy that's stated explicitly that says there is a moratorium on gas expansion in the state of Maryland. I believe that to be a false narrative.
Well, sir, I would respectfully disagree. First of all, I'm not sure where the Alta Gas merger occurred in conjunction with when the GHG reduction was expanded. I'm not sure the time frame there, but the fact of the matter is that MDE has said we have to transition to electrification, particularly building electrification. So while they may not have said it in the absolute terms that you have used, they have said that the goal to achieve Maryland's reduction, you have to transition to building electrification, which in essence means no more gas.
I disagree with that. You can achieve 40% reduction, just like you can achieve 30% reduction or 20% reduction under the previous act, or 25% through many sources. It's a net reduction, and no one has explicitly stated that natural gas cannot be used or expanded in the state of Maryland. When a bill passes and the governor signs such a bill, then I'll believe that. But this is simply a narrative that's not true right now.
I would respectfully disagree. MDE has expressly said that we have to transition to building electrification, which means that all residential and commercial buildings would be heated by some form of electric generation, not gas. Now, they have not.
The public utilities article authorizes us to act in this matter, and I believe we should act. And I don't think MDE, by a fiat through a paper, has the authority of law to say we can't expand gas in the state of Maryland. I think that is a false narrative, Mr. Chairman. I'm done with my questions. Thank you.
Commissioner, I just want to say I was not saying that MDE has said that you can't do this. That was not my intention at all. If that's how it came through, I am absolutely sorry. I'm just saying MDE has said that we should need to transition to electrification, and that approving this would be contrary to that position of MDE. I was not saying they're saying you can't do it. And I apologize if that's how it came through.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions from commissioners? Hearing none, based on the arguments and the application made by Chesapeake, I find no lawful basis to deny the application for the public utilities article. At this point, I'm going to call a a motion that we authorize Chesapeake Utilities Corporation to exercise the franchise agreement with Somerset County. The vote begins with Commissioner Richard.
Let me just explain my vote. I do agree with Sierra Club and with what we're seeing more from coming out of MDE that I question whether I should have voted during the Alta Gas in favor of gas expansion. I think things are changing, and I believe that we have to be very cautious, and for me anyway, on any type of these future gas expansion requests. However, in this case, because it is specifically, referencing the ECI project and University of Maryland as Eastern Shore projects, I believe that the state has already seen it in the public interest to move forward with these projects. So, for that reason, I am going to vote yes on the motion.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Also vote aye. The motion is approved.
My speaker turned off.
Mr. Chairman, item number 5 on today's administrative agenda is Starion Energy's motion to discontinue filing biannual reports of customer complaints. On this item for staff, we have Michael Dean and Lucy Shea. For the company, Rob Gassner and Rob Bassett, and for the Office of People's Counsel, Jacob Auslander.
Thank you. We'll begin with staff.
Good morning, Commissioners. Michael Dean on behalf of staff. Starion Energy was a licensed supplier when, after the customer complaints, it opened a proceeding in case number 9325. After a hearing on March 7, 2014, the Commission in order number 86211 imposed a civil penalty of $350,000, required process improvements, and directed Starion each 6 months to file a report with a list of all statewide customer complaints, including the nature of the complaint and its resolution. Starion on May 15, 2017 filed a motion seeking to discontinue this reporting of customer complaints. In denying that motion, the Commission on August 25, 2017, in order number 88354, stated that Starion could not file a similar motion to end the reporting requirement for at least 2 years. On April 23, 2020, Starion filed a motion seeking biannual reports of statewide customer complaints. As discussed in this HITS comments, staff reviewed the motion and Commission orders and recommended granting the motion for the following reasons. First, the number of statewide complaints has been decreasing. In the last 6 biannual reports, the number of statewide complaints has never exceeded 3 in a 6-month period, and in the last 3 reports had either 1 or 0 complaints. Secondly, by order number 84096 on June 9, 2011, in case number 9253, the Commission issued a civil penalty on gas and electricity supplier North American Power and Gas and imposed a monthly reporting requirement regarding remedial measures. North American Power and Gas filed a motion to end its reporting requirement, which the Commission granted in August 16, 2013, in order number 85794. As noted in the Starion motion, North American Power and Gas was allowed to end its filing of reports after 27 months following its order, while it has issued the order which initiated Starion's reporting obligation. Lastly, the Consumer Affairs Division recently began publishing a report on the Commission website of supplier complaints and list any supplier that receives more than 3 complaints in a given month. Since this practice has been initiated, Starion has never appeared on this report. Based on the relatively low number of customer complaints against Starion, the decision to end a reporting requirement involving another supplier resulting from market violations and the new Consumer Affairs Division initiative of reporting of supplier complaints, it is uncertain whether the continued biannual reporting of customer complaints imposed in 2014 continues to serve its original purpose. Staff therefore recommends that the Commission grant the motion of Starion to end this reporting requirement. In mail log number 230754, the Office of People's Counsel provided its reasons why the motion should be denied, and Starion also filed a response to this filing in mail log number 230728. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Counsel for Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Jacob Auslander on behalf of the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, we did file some comments on Monday opposing Starion's request. As we pointed out in our letter, the Commission's objective when it issued the order at the end of case 9324 was to impose, in lieu of the full amount of sanctions, a reporting requirement on Starion that was not tied simply to Starion avoiding customer complaints, but to provide an opportunity to evaluate whether the compliance mechanisms that the company had offered in mitigation were functioning properly, meaning that they were sufficient to avoid the types of violations that were occurring with the company's telemarketing and door-to-door sales activity. So we think that the premise of Starion's motion is flawed. The absence of complaints is not the criteria that the company's actions should be evaluated on. In fact, until the company engages in the type of marketing that led to that reporting obligation, I believe that OPC's position would be that we cannot properly evaluate whether that compliance mechanism is functioning properly. And I am aware that Starion has filed a supplemental reply to OPC's comments and has made an assertion that the company does not plan to engage in telemarketing activity or door-to-door sales activity for the foreseeable future. I imagine that what they're implying is that because they need to notify staff, OPC, and the Commission that they are beginning door-to-door sales activity or telemarketing sales activity 30 days prior, that we would be put on notice. And I guess we can look at the reports coming out of CAD, or we could perhaps ask questions of the company itself to evaluate whether the company is seeing a unusual spike in complaint volume. And my response to that argument is that the reporting obligation as it stands relieves the Commission and staff and OPC of the obligation to constantly investigate the company's actions. It imposes a requirement on them to report to us, and relieves us of the burden of seeking that information out. So to the extent that the company does not plan to engage in door-to-door sales activity and telemarketing, perhaps a compromise position would be to pause the reporting requirement until they do engage in that activity. But the idea that they should be allowed to avoid what was, a very important part of the sanctions imposed by the Commission at the conclusion of 9324, simply because they stopped operating and their complaint numbers dropped, is, from OPC's position, a ridiculous proposition.
Thank you. Counsel for Starion.
Rob Gassner here on behalf of Starion Energy, and I'd just like to point out, I also have Rob Bassett with me here and Charlie Sadevsky from my law firm as well.
Mr. Slender, if you could mute your, thank you. Sure.
To briefly summarize Starion's position, staff has already gone over a few of them. Number one, Starion's instituted numerous compliance measures since the passage of Order 886-211. Starion's completely reorganized its compliance department. It's augmented staff dedicated to regulatory compliance issue. It's put Maryland-specific compliance policies in place, and it's provided ongoing compliance training for its staff. The commission already had a 3-day evidentiary hearing in which it reviewed Starion's compliance efforts. Basically, PULJ Sober was able to hear hours and hours of testimony, review over 1,000 pages of documents, and review hundreds of hours of recordings. And
Mr. Gaster?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you pull your microphone a little closer? You're beginning to fade on us.
Sure. Is that better?
Just marginally, but you can proceed.
Okay. I'll try to speak up. So, as I was saying, the commission already had a 3-day evidentiary hearing in which it reviewed Starion's compliance efforts. And it looked at hours of testimony, hundreds of hours of recordings of customer interaction phone calls, over 1,000 pages of documents, and PULJ Sober was able to basically evaluate Starion's compliance efforts. OPC was able to evaluate Starion's compliance efforts. So for OPC at this point, to sort of minimize those efforts and say, oh, well, it's just a fact of the fact that Starion's not specifically engaging door-to-door marketing or unsolicited telemarketing really contradicts sort of the record already established in this proceeding and the findings of PULJ Sober. Furthermore, the Commission's Consumer Affairs Division now publishes a report on a quarterly basis regarding customer complaints against retail energy suppliers. And OPC fails to acknowledge this in their reply. I don't recall them referencing that. They don't really address why the function that's being served by Starion's reporting requirements under Order 86211 would not be effectively covered by CAD's new reporting efforts. So, to the extent that there were an uptick, as OPC sort of speculates, were Starion to change its marketing tactics to begin door-to-door sales, for example, if there were an uptick in complaints, that would show up in CAD's reports. Similarly, as staff noted, other suppliers that have had similar sanctions imposed upon them, most notably North American Gas, were relieved of these reporting requirements after a period of just 27 months instead of the 70 months and counting that Starion has been subjected to this reporting requirement. So, in conclusion, Starion believes that although the reporting requirements might have been appropriate 5 years ago, given the record before the Commission regarding Starion's compliance effort, again, detailed over a 3-day evidentiary hearing, the overall relatively low levels of complaints against Starion, and in particular, CAD's reporting requirements, which effectively make Starion's filings somewhat redundant, Starion feels that it would be appropriate this time to ending the reporting requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Gassner. I have a few questions for Mr. Auslander. Mr. Auslander, it's been a number of years since Starion has been subjected to these reporting requirements. And as a former prosecutor, I would make an analogy to any of the convictions. At some point, probation has to end, and it appears that with the passage of time, Starion has changed its marketing practices dramatically, almost rendering these reports null and void. Is there any information that Starion is currently reporting that the Commission doesn't currently have, either through CAD or the new CEU, that you need to gain access to?
I don't believe that there's any information that is currently reflected in the reports that would not be obtainable from other sources. I believe that the point that I made regarding that the information that is otherwise available is either buried in a report with lots of other companies or would require some specific action by my office or staff to send a data request and perhaps engage in some type of discovery battle with the company to obtain.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see that as it may reduce the burden on you in finding the information, but I don't see that as a procedural benefit that we have through this reporting that we couldn't otherwise get from CAD. I also, looking at their recent track record, they're not on our offenders list that we now publish publicly on our website every quarter, meaning that they're not going over the 3 complaint threshold. I recognize that Starion has had a checkered past over the years, but just looking at complaint data, they've improved dramatically with no complaints, to my knowledge, filed in this calendar year. Thank you. Do other commissioners have questions? Hearing none, I'll propose that we grant Starion's motion. The vote begins with Commissioner Richard.
I vote aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioner Linton.
Mr. Chairman, I would recuse myself from this vote on this matter. As you know, I was active in the original investigation, and I think it's appropriate that I not vote at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Your recusal from this item is noted for the record. And Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
I also vote aye, noting Commissioner Linton's recusal. The motion is approved.
Mr. Chairman, item number 6 on today's administrative agenda is Ingerman Construction's application to install a natural gas submetering system to service the Greenmount and Chase apartment complex in Baltimore, Maryland. On this item for staff, we have Michael Dean, Lucy Shea, Mikhail Spiegelman, and John Clemenson, and for the company, Edward Koop and David Holden.
Thank you. We'll begin with staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Michael Spiegelman on behalf of staff. This item concerns a request by Ingerman Construction Management, LLC, filed on April 30, 2020, for approval of submetering system for a 56-unit affordable apartment complex located at 700 East Chase Street, Baltimore, Maryland. In present filing, Ingerman Construction has provided documentation that the Gallus 2000 gas meters will be installed for the submetering system at the apartment complex. This meter is currently listed on the Commission's website as an approved gas meter for billing purposes. According to a member of Greenmount LLC, the owner of the apartment complex, an administrative fee for billing services will not exceed $1 per month per unit. This is in full compliance with Commer 20.25.01.05H. Greenmount LLC further states that as the owner of the apartment complex, it will be paying for all common space gas usage costs as required by Commer 20.25.01.02B3. Therefore, staff recommends that the Commission note the filing of the submetering system application for Greenmount and Chase apartment complex in Baltimore, Maryland, owned by Greenmount LLC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegelman. Next, we'll hear from representatives from Ingerman Construction Management.
I'm Ed Koop, and I'm here with David Holden.
Good morning.
I'm not sure.
You have any comments to add based on staff's recitation?
No, we tried to, we met with the gas company. We tried to go with a normal metering system. The problem was they can't guarantee us the load or the pounds of gas that we need to make sure that none of these apartments lose heat or hot water, in a during a season. So we had to add a pump, and once we do that, we have to meter it ourselves, is what they told us.
Okay, thank you. And can we just get both of your names for the record?
I am Edward Koop. David Holden. And David Holden.
Thank you, Mr. Coop and Mr. Holden. Do commissioners have questions on this item? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask Mr. Coop, actually, let me start with staff. Staff, I didn't see, Mr. Spiegelman, I didn't see a response to data request 2-1 in the documents that were filed for this item. Did we receive a response to data request 2-1?
Yes, I believe so. And I think it's included in a box sheet.
Okay, I must have missed that. I saw answers to, I think, all the data request series 1 questions, but I didn't see 2-1. I must have missed it. What did it say? What was the response to 2-1? Here's the reason I'm asking the question. This is a low pressure system that BG&E has and other utilities in the state of Maryland have utilized all the time, and yet we're being told it can't provide the service to this particular apartment complex, and I'm wondering why. Why is that?
So because gas appliances won't be able to function without gas booster pump.
I'm asking why.
Oh.
If I may speak, the engineer did a calculation of all the appliances there. We have tankless hot water heaters, high efficiency HVAC units, and gas appliances. And I believe it's, from what I understand, it's the gas tankless hot water heaters that I guess have it on demand of more gas usage, and that's why we needed that. Okay.
So then let me come back to you, Mr. Coop. Thank you, Mr. Spiegelman. Mr. Coop,
yes.
How is the addition of this pump, which is outside of our jurisdiction because it's on your side of the meter, but I need to know this. How does the addition of this pump potentially add to an overpressurization event, which could be catastrophic in your apartment complex? How do you control that? Is there a regulator or relief valve? Is there something that prevents an overpressurization event like happened in Andover, Massachusetts?
I would have to defer to my engineer, but I do believe it has all the safety features. We went through it with the gas company. It was approved by them for what we were doing. I believe it has fail safes on it if you want, I can get that answer and have it sent to you.
Yeah, I'd like to know that, because if this building, God forbid, should have a catastrophic failure due to an overpressurization, I'm not going to feel very good about approving this item, especially if there's loss of life associated with it.
We agree wholeheartedly. I don't know that it adds that much pressure. It just takes it. I mean, we're very close, but nobody can guarantee. So I think it's just adding a slight guarantee that the pressure would never drop below what is needed. But I can have that answered by the engineer.
Your Honor, this is Michael Dean. I have pulled up the response to the data request if you have any questions on it.
What does it say, Mr. Dean?
None of the questions in the data request number 1 appear to deal with the issue that you're talking about.
No, it's 2-1. 2-1 asks the question, why can't BG&E supply? And I didn't see a response to it.
Okay, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'll find that one.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I don't know, are we gonna, would the commission entertain waiting? Is there a timeliness requirement on this item?
Commissioner O'Donnell, it appears that the only request before the commission, it's not even a request, it's just to note the filing. So the commission's not necessarily taking any substantive action, but I would entertain a continuance and just moving this 1 week if that is your request. And we could find the response to data request 2.1, which I don't have in front of me on it.
I don't think I'm going to request that, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Coop, if you could provide me with the information, I'll accept that afterwards, since it's really non-jurisdictional for us, but it's just of interest to me. So if you wouldn't mind getting back.
You're on mute, Mr. Coop.
I'll get with the engineer and I'll have them pull together everything, all the submittal of the pump, everything, and send it over to you just so you can have a better feel for what it is.
We greatly appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Not a problem.
I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. And Mr. Dean, if and when you find the response to data request 2.1, if you could share that with the commissioners just for our information. Are there other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one question for Mr. Coop. Prior to determining that there was a low pressure issue at this property, was it Green Mountain's intention to install a sub-metering system there, or was that the result of the low pressure system?
It was a result of the low pressure. Ideally, we met with the gas company. We actually had an area picked out for all their meters outside. And then we went back and forth and they just couldn't give us a guarantee of the pressure in that area. We looked at going to a different street and bringing the service in, and it was to no avail. One of the problems that we run into, like we were discussing while we were listening to some of your other hearings, why didn't we switch to electric hot water heaters? The problem is we have to build energy efficient, it's affordable housing. So we're held to some pretty high standards. So we use the tankless gas hot water heaters to get those to meet the criteria that we're with.
So I guess I said I had one question. Now I got another one.
Okay.
So since you are working on affordable housing here, and now you have to switch not only the sub-metering but include this boiler as part of it, or this pressure system as part of it, is that going to increase the costs that these tenants are going to have to pay now for heating?
No.
Okay, so you've been able to work it out so that the pricing for them should remain at least within.
Yes, and these will be very high efficient and should be low cost.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Seeing no additional questions from commissioners, I will propose that we note the filing of the sub-metering system application for the Greenmount and Chase apartment complex in Baltimore, Maryland, owned by Greenmount LIHTC LLC. The vote begins with Commissioner Richard.
I vote aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
And Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved. Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, item number 7 on today's administrative agenda consists of Washington Gas Light Company's annual STRIDE report. Annette Garofalo, Michael Dean, Afton Hauer, Negusi Tefei, Felix Patterson, and Jamie Smith. And for the company, John Dodge, Wayne Ackus, Jack Morrow, Dave Kenahan, Andrew Lawson, Matt Esmacher, Tracy Townsend, and Aaron Stuber. And for the Office of People's Counsel, Joseph Kleber.
Thank you. This is coming back from a prior administrative meeting on April 22nd. We'll begin with staff. Ms. Garofalo, your microphone is off.
Thank you. Annette Garofalo on behalf of Commission staff. As was noted, Washington Gas Light Company has filed its STRIDE reconciliation filing for calendar year 2019. This is the second year of WGL's STRIDE 2. The matter was heard at the April 22nd administrative meeting. However, no rates were accepted at that time. After the hearing, WGL made various filings which showed a decrease in depreciation expense and an increase in interest expense. Allowing for the fact that the reconciliation factor will not be billed until July, WGL's overall revenue requirement changed by approximately $511, as shown by the company's revised attachment J. That's an increase in the return to the customers of that amount. Staff has reviewed the new filings and found the calculations to be accurate. After reconciliation, which is based on actual 2019 collections, stride rates will decrease. It should be mentioned that WGL's revised filings require the engineering division to conduct discovery regarding variances on certain projects. However, changes in the variances were limited and did not affect the reconciliation factor. Mr. Nagusi Tenfeye of the engineering division, Mr. Felix Patterson of the accounting investigation divisions, and Ms. Afton Hauer of the telecommunications, gas, and water division are available to answer any questions. And I believe we have additional members of some of those divisions available as well.
Great, thank you. We have the whole team with us today. We'll move to Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Joseph Cleaver on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel. As this commission knows, when OPC reviewed the company's March 16th filing, we had concern over some of the percentages, completion percentages for certain asset classes comparing actual results to targets. And our April 20th comments, which were before the commission at the April 22nd administrative meeting, expressed those concerns. Following that meeting, when the commission instructed the parties to continue to talk and exchange information, OPC received responses to a couple of questions that I had posed to Washington Gas's counsel regarding the reasons for certain completion percentages being in the 60 to low 70% range. The response that we got, Your Honor, only increased our concerns. The response, which is attached to our June 8th comments, which were filed in anticipation of this meeting, indicates that the company's explanation for the percentages that we pointed out in our April 20th comments is tied to the timing associated with the company's 2018 rate case, which was proceeding in parallel with its Stride 2 case in chief. The rate case was 9481. The Stride case was 9486. The company explains in its response to what's been designated OPC DR 16-1 that it discovered in late 2018, or it realized that based on the timing of the rate case, that it wouldn't be able to know the exact amount of the 2019 surcharge. And when the company came to this realization, it reassigned 4 of its 15 Stride crews to other non-Stride work. And then in January 2019, reassigned another, leaving only 10 of its 15 Stride crews available. The company says that it had to do this in order to avoid idling the crews because it didn't know the exact amount of its 2019 Stride surcharge and didn't have an approved 2019 project list. Your Honor, as a preliminary matter, I would just note that I find the claim that the company didn't realize until late 2018 how the rate case timing would work in conjunction with the new Stride plan to be confusing. The company knew when the rate case would be decided. It made the decision to file the Stride proceeding and the rate case in parallel. So it's not clear to me why the company didn't realize that there may be some delay due to the interplay between the two proceedings going into the 2019 year. But setting that aside for a minute, Your Honor, as to what they knew and when they knew it or why they didn't know it, I think there are 2 primary points that I would like to make today. Points made in our letter, but if I could briefly just expand a bit. The first point is, again, setting aside the reasons for making this decision, This decision, as the company explained, to reduce the stride crew complement from 15 to 11 was made, the decision was made in the November to December 2018 timeframe. At that time, the company's stride 2 application with a greatly expanded scope was before the commission. But the commission was not made aware of that, nor was the commission made aware of it after the December 11th order in 9486. When the company filed its project list for 2019 on January 9th, 2019, the company didn't inform the commission of this fact. And in fact, in the January 9th, 2019 project list, the company increased the number of projects beyond what it had projected and presented to the commission in 9486. I'm sure the commission recalls that it did that in order to compensate for the commission's ruling on budget contingency and including that amount. There was a lot of discussion about that when that decision was made. I think that Commissioner O'Donnell expressed concern. I do recall that was a year and a half ago, but I recall him using the term backfill. But nonetheless, after consideration, the commission did ultimately approve that. But the commission was not made aware at that time that the stride crew complement had been diminished by a third, down to 10 crews at the time. And the company didn't inform the commission of this on January 23rd, when the January 9th, 2019 project list was under consideration. The second point I would like to make is when you think about what the company's saying, it seems to be at odds with the stated safety purpose of the stride law and the reason that this commission has, in its orders, looked favorably upon stride filings in the past. The company is essentially saying that they suspended or at least scaled way back on their stride work because they didn't know the exact amount of the 2019 stride surcharge, and they didn't have an approved project list. Your Honor, these projects, and we just went through a long discussion about this with respect in the Columbia Gas stride docket about, whether even if a project isn't necessarily recovered through stride, it still has been identified as a priority project that should be completed. We were talking about this a couple months ago in that case. Even if the company didn't know on January 1st, 2019, the exact calculation of the surcharge, or didn't have an approved project list, that hardly justifies handicapping the ability to complete the project list that was filed, or even the smaller project list that had been presented in 9486, because you didn't know the exact calculation. That's really letting the rate recovery component of stride dictate the program, and that prioritization of the rate recovery part, as we can see, it had this domino effect, according to the company's own explanation, that persisted throughout 2019. So by giving such priority to the surcharge instead of the work, the company shifted away all these crews and wasn't able to get them back. The company says that they internally determined that they needed an average of 21 crews per month to complete the work that had been presented to the commission. But because of these decisions, even though they were able to get a lot of these crews back and additional crews throughout 2019, they were only able to average 17 crews throughout the year. And so that's the ultimate explanation that the company provides for why these completion percentages for certain asset classes were significantly below where one would expect them to be. In our April 20th comments, Your Honor, we asked for the commission to order the company to show cause why it shouldn't exercise its revisory power. We haven't seen anything in the discovery responses that were provided since those comments were filed or since the April 22nd meeting where this was discussed to cause us to reconsider that recommendation. So as we stated in our June 8th comments, we would continue to recommend that the commission require the company to respond to a show cause order, explaining to the commission why the program shouldn't be revised. Thank you.
We'll now hear from Washington Gas and their response to the concerns of Office of People's Counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. John Dodge appearing on behalf of Washington Gas, and just a sound check to make sure that I'm coming through okay. Thank you, sir. I do have some remarks, and if it appears that I'm reading, it's because I am. Thank you for your patience as this item has been shifted forward a few times. Since the April 22nd administrative meeting, Washington Gas has answered 11 additional sets of informal and formal discovery, 10 from staff and 1 from OPC. The company has made itself available on call at any time for discovery conferences with staff or OPC. We have provided a full explanation of the causes of our 2019 completion percentages. We have corrected our cost estimates for 2019 work. I apologize, that's my dog in the background. The mailman must be here. We have provided a full explanation of the causes of our 2019 completion percentages. We have corrected our cost estimates for 2019 work for inflation and using the new estimation methodology approved by the Commission in 2018, even though arguably we were not required to do so. All of this activity has been an exercise in transparency. The very same transparency we promised in case number 9605, our 2019 rate case, when we agreed to meet with OPC and staff to explain our new cost estimating processes and cost variances, and when we agreed to more information sharing and reporting protocols. And that process is ongoing. We have also made a small correction, as staff counsel noted, to our 2020 surcharge, a $500 or so change in depreciation charges, to make sure that the surcharge reflects the actual costs the company incurred in 2019. If our surcharge is approved today, we will refund approximately $472,000, including interest, to Maryland ratepayers between July and December of this year. A residential customer will receive a refund of 78 cents, including interest. That's 78 cents total, or 13 cents per month. As mentioned in our June 5th cover letter, the company spent $57.1 million on STRIDE projects in 2019, but we collected the revenue requirement associated with the approved $66 million spent, a difference of, which should have been $2.41 million. We should have collected $1.9 million, and we're refunding the difference with interest. As our June 5th cover letter also indicates, through the end of 2019, we completed 70% of distribution service projects. We installed 95% of distribution main and retired 72% of that distribution main. And we had spent 86% of our 2019 budget. Through the end of April, our last verifiable data, we have completed 91% of 2019 distribution work and spent 97% of the 2019 budget. These latest figures show, as we explained in response to OPC data request number 16, that project spend is front-loaded on main work, which represents the majority of the cost for 2019 project scope. Our letter anticipated and answered OPC's claims repeated here this morning that Washington Gas should have known what the late 2018 regulatory calendar meant for 2019 project completion. We have never claimed perfect foresight and reasonably thought that, despite the delays, some of which were our own making admittedly, that we could complete the 29 project scopes on time. Washington Gas demonstrated the ability to add construction resources, increasing crew levels from 10 to 25 over the course of 2019. It just took longer to add these resources than we originally anticipated. If Washington Gas had made the decision to hold back STRIDE crews away from other work, the cost of reserving idle crews is approximately $60,000 per month per crew. That would not have been a reasonable or prudent approach to managing our overall construction costs, not to say just STRIDE. Finally, Washington Gas does not believe there is a need for or evidence on this record to support a show cause order. The information we have provided over the last several weeks in response to additional discovery and volunteered ourselves is exactly the information we would provide in response to a show cause order. As I mentioned on April 22nd, a gas company's 5-year STRIDE case is essentially a continuing show cause case. We urge the Commission to accept our 2019 annual report and our further revised reconciliation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We stand ready to answer any questions you or your fellow commissioners may have.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. It appears that the gist of OPC's concerns or their request through a show cause proceeding here is to reduce the scope of first year investments in the Stride 2 plan. I know OPC also had a number, Mr. Cleaver, you had a number of requests for information at the very end of your pleading dated June 8th. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Cleaver first. Were you not able to get responses to those items? You have 4 items at the very end of your pleading. And I just wanted to make sure that the Washington Gas was not being either being cooperative or not being cooperative in getting you that information.
Your Honor, no suggestion that Washington Gas has not been cooperative, as we pointed out in terms of discovery. As we pointed out in the letter, our comments of June 8th, we did have a lengthy call with the company. I believe it was on May 6th. The company had a number of representatives on the call. There were several people from staff, and I believe the call was about 2 hours long. We were given the opportunity to, ask questions, and we certainly appreciate that. So there's no suggestion in the letter, and didn't mean to say that the company was not providing certain information that had been requested. But Your Honor, we've heard the explanation now. We asked point blank, what's the explanation for these low percentages, and these are the responses that we got. And I just think that it raises so many additional questions that we're at a point now where, in our view, some more commission involvement is warranted based on what these responses have said and all of the questions that they raise as to the likelihood that the company is going to complete the project list that it provided in 2020, and that it will complete the project list that it will supply in future years in line with the expanded scope of the plan that the commission has approved.
Well, I think you have shined a spotlight on some legitimate concerns with what we saw over the past year with these numbers and the timing issues that that WGL is now trying to use to explain away what was going on while we had the rate case in front of us and the Stride proceeding at the same time. I may have some follow-up questions, but I'm going to turn to my fellow commissioners, starting with Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Dodge, OPC is saying that the movement of the crews out of Stride, and then they get engaged in other projects, and then they come back to Stride, but there's delay in that. So one of my questions is, I'm pretty sure that Washington Gas on several occasions has told this commission that they're not going to have problem obtaining crews. Can you address that little bit of a disconnect there for me?
I'll try, and then I'll ask my colleague Jack Morrow to weigh in, Your Honor. The short answer is we do not have problems acquiring crews. As Mr. Cleaver pointed out, we moved from 10 to 25 crews in 2019. The problem is assigning or juggling those crews when there are delays, not just in Stride, but recall, Your Honor, that we operate a multi-jurisdictional, multi-program replacement effort here at the company. So it is tempting to look at Stride in isolation and say, you should have known that you couldn't have done this. You should have held crews in reserve. You should have reported to the commission. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we thought that even with the delay of approximately 1 month, that we were going to be able to bring those crews back and finish the 2019 project list. We didn't, because of a series of cascading events that we outlined, mostly in response to OPC data request number 16-1. I understand that OPC does not like the answer and does not accept the answer, but that does not change the answer that we were able to bring on sufficient crews, and had we had perhaps a little better luck during 2019, I think our completion percentages probably would have been much higher. And I'll ask Mr. Morrow to weigh in on any subtleties that I have missed.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. This is Jack Morrow, Director of Construction for Washington Gas. Mr. Dodge is absolutely correct. It did take us a little bit longer to shift the crews back onto the stride work. We did feel that we would be able to get the work completed. And, this currently right now we have 23 crews working on stride. So we're making great headway on our stride list in 2020. We have over 56% of the main already installed. And we don't see an issue of like we had last year of falling short on the completed units.
Okay, thank you. Now, Stride is a program that, projects move from year to year. They, sometimes they can't be completed within the anticipated period of time. But how confident are you that you're going to complete the 5-year plan under, at the 5-year budget?
It's a great question. And for this one, I hope that Tracy Townsend and or Dave Kenahan can join us to answer your question.
Good morning, Tracy Townsend, Vice President at Washington Gas, responsible for the execution of the STRIDE program and the program management of STRIDE. Commissioner Herman, to answer your question, as we did in STRIDE 1, we do, because of the phases of work that don't start and stop very cleanly with a January 1 start and a December 31 stop. We do have phased or multi-year projects, and we do manage across the 5-year plan in total. And I believe in the former STRIDE 1 conclusion, we managed it very tightly to the overall $218.5 million. And we have every intention, and we do regular resource planning to make certain that happens as well. And there will be fluctuations from one STRIDE year, 19 to 20, 20 to 21. But we, again, we have a plan, and we will work it towards the overall 5-year plan totals.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Dodge, I'm going to ask you a question, but you may need help from maybe your vice president there. It seems like to me we've had continuing questions about the ability of Washington Gas to accurately forecast in both the Empower program and in the STRIDE program. And this opinion goes back for years. It's not one specific issue, but it's significant, in my opinion, lack of forecasting accuracy. And notwithstanding the testimony of Washington Gas in 2019 in front of the Legislative Committee of Jurisdiction, the House Economic Matters Committee, and later the Senate Finance Committee, basically talking about the prowess of Washington Gas in forecasting and the excellent ability, the capability. I was stunned by that testimony, to be honest with you, stunned by it. Because of all the utilities that we deal with, Washington Gas has continued to demonstrate a lack of forecasting accuracy. Can you comment on that? And what are you doing? What is the company doing to improve its forecasting capabilities?
Thank you, Your Honor. I will take a crack at 2/3 of your question and then ask Ms. Townsend to weigh in on the latter third, if I may. You raised the same concern in the April 22nd administrative meeting, and I went back to Jim Wagner, who was our witness in front of the legislature for the hearing that you referenced, and we stand by that testimony. Jim was describing enterprise-wide forecasting as between budgeting and revenues, and for the period in question, the company demonstrated the accuracy of its forecast by coming in within 1% of its either 1 or 2 year forecast. So we stand by the testimony and stand by our position that we do a good job enterprise-wide in our cost and budgeting forecast. With respect to Empower, Your Honor is very familiar with the troubles that Washington Gas's nascent program had. We did not play well in the sandbox with some of our electric counterparts. And I believe that that disconnect, if you will, was the primary reason for our shortfall. In the last 12 to 18 months, I believe we have turned that program around. I don't have the statistics at my fingertips, but a change in management, a change in focus, and quite frankly, a rededication of resources to our Empower program. And I believe I can say with certainty that at minimum, our forecasting for Empower is much improved over the prior period. I don't have specific variances to offer, but I think we have improved greatly there. As for Stride and construction forecasting, I'll let Ms. Townsend take a crack at that. Thank you.
Again, Tracy Townsend, Vice President at Washington Gas. Commissioner O'Donnell, I think we have had a long dialogue around the company's reflection of estimates on our project lists. And we formed working groups and worked with all the parties to better understand. We had been using estimates for a very different purpose because of the time that we submitted the project list for approvals. And so since then, we have greatly improved our cost estimating process and the documentation thereof. And I think we have shared that with lots of robust and rich dialogue with staff around even the technical conferences that came out of our base rate case 9605. And so I think I would offer that, you know, if we had used updated cost estimating for the 2019 work, the variances would have been somewhere between a -1% and a +5%, depending on the contents. Back to my dialogue with Commissioner Herman, there are carryover projects. So sometimes it's hard to figure out what updated cost memo we would use in order to do that. But again, very tight compared to our past experiences with the differences between actuals and estimates that we've had, you know, a fulsome dialogue around variances about that. So that's what I would offer, is that we've had the improvements in the estimating, and we are tracking very closely to that with that revised 2019 calculation, and certainly in the 2020 list as well.
So thank you for that. Do you think it would be fair to say that the commission should expect to see a significant improvement in Washington Gas's ability to forecast going forward in both the Empower program and the Stride program?
So at risk of not trying to pass the hot potato to somebody else, I probably am not the best person to speak about the Empower program, Commissioner, but I do represent and am accountable for the Stride program. And yes, I would commit that we are estimating and tracking much more closely given those new estimates and the new reporting requirements that we have committed to, the variance explanations that we have also collaborated with the other parties on. So yes, I believe that will be a similar result in 2020, where our estimates will be, our actuals will be much closer to the estimates.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may, this is John Dodge again. I will commit to getting you our latest forecast results for the Empower program. Again, I was not prepared for this question, and I apologize for that. But we can make an informal filing or a formal filing at the Commission's direction on how we're doing over the past perhaps 2 reporting cycles for Empower to see what the trend is there.
Yeah, but thank you, Mr. Dodge, for that offer. I personally, just speaking for myself, don't think that's necessary. The discussion wasn't to be today about Empower as much as it was to be about the company's ability to accurately forecast. I think I heard both you talk about Empower and the Vice President talk about Stride, and I personally will expect to see improvements in forecasting ability discussions in the future, and hopefully that'll be the case. I did have another question, though, I wanted to ask. I'll probably go to staff first and then maybe come back to the company, if I might. Let me find it. On the supplemental, on page 6 of 10, there's a section talking about replacement of low-pressure pipes. Could the staff person who can speak to that section respond? Or let me know who it is so I can ask you a question.
Page 6, that would be our engineering witness, Mr. Negusi Tefeye. I think he's on here. Negusi, are you there? John Clementson? Oh.
Mr. Tefeye, you have to unmute. There you go. All right. So on page, yes, we can hear you now, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
So if you look on page 6 where it talks about replacement of low pressure pipe, are you with me there?
Let me try to find, just give me a second.
Okay. This is on the supplemental filing.
Yes, I'm there, sir.
If you look at that, the very last sentence of that paragraph says this: low pressure pipes replacement projects are prioritized based on the Optimane risk score and to coordinate with planned MCDOT work in order to limit the impact to customers. So what does that mean? What can you interpret that for me? What does that say?
Washington Gas, when they prioritize, their projects, this is one of the reasons they give. The low pressure pipes replacement projects are prioritized based on upon the optimal risk score. I think that optimal risk score was approved by. It's a system approved by the commissioners, right?
Right. And so I understand that part of it. The Optimane part of it makes sense to me. It's the part about the Montgomery County Department of Transportation kind of controlling whether or not low pressure pipes get replaced. That's the part I don't understand. And the inconvenience that may cause the customers. An overpressurization event in a low pressure system will cause a real inconvenience to the customers. In fact, it bankrupted the utility in Andover, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think that is related. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's what I'm asking. Go ahead.
So I think that is related with the explanation of Washington Gas regarding, the jurisdiction Montgomery County has, and that will be, I think, well explained by Washington Gas if we ask them.
So now I'll go back to Washington Gas and ask my obvious questions. What is the priority of your replacement of low pressure system? Because the buck sheet seems to indicate it's low on your priority list, even subordinate to Montgomery County Department of Transportation schedule.
Thank you, Your Honor. John Dodge weighing in once again. I can tackle the front half of the question, then I'll tee it up for Mr. Morrow, our Director of Construction. As you're aware, Commissioner, we do not have a separate STRIDE program for low pressure pipe. That means that we have to filter our low pressure projects in exactly the same way that we do our other projects. So it's a relative risk ranking, and because of the results of our algorithms and field observations, and also I would add as a sidebar that after the Andover incident, Washington Gas, like every other gas company in the country, we went out and checked our pressurization key points, and everything is fine. We continue to check those. So the front half of the question, which I realize is not the focus of your question, the front half of the answer rather, is that Optimain is the governing principle, if you will, for across all programs, and that includes informally low pressure. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Morrow now to explain the Montgomery County DOT piece of the equation.
Good morning, Commissioner. This is Jack Morrow again with Washington Gas. I believe what the meaning behind the statement was in regards to some of our cast iron projects, the low pressure. Whenever an entity is doing a road improvement project, we will work with them to make sure that we get out there before they do all of their work and disturb our low pressure system. So in conjunction with them, when they have a project, we'll move that work up ahead of some of the other projects that we have. And then as Mr. Dodge explained, we use the risk ranking for that. And last year we did remove 14,500 feet of low pressure mains in our system.
Yeah, I frequented about 3 miles, a little less than 3 miles. I saw that, but when I read Washington Gas's submittals related to this matter, this item before us, I didn't get a sense that you got real priority or real focus on this. I do from other utilities since the Andover incident, but again, to me it's an existential hazard that really needs to be addressed, and I see other utilities kind of taking that very seriously. I hear you saying you're taking it seriously, but I don't see it in your submittals or your filings like I have with other utilities, and that's why I'm questioning it. Because look, it put a major utility in bankruptcy, put them out of business, and it killed a person and it injured dozens of others. And I keep talking about this not because I want something to talk about, but because I think it's a real and present danger for the citizens of the state of Maryland. And I don't get a sense from Washington Gas that it's truly a priority. It's subordinate to making too many cuts in the street.
Your Honor, we've had a similar conversation in the past, and we will take this back once again. I would only add that in the past, when the company has proposed departing from a project list or departing from Optimain or other relative risk rankings, we have been criticized for doing that. And I hear you about the existential threat. I share that concern with you. But in our best engineering judgment, we are treating low pressure replacements properly, and we certainly are continuing heightened scrutiny of our low pressure system, particularly at the point where pressure is stepped down to accommodate that older pipe, as Jack described. So I think we are operating above and beyond federal and state safety requirements with respect to low pressure. But we will continue this discussion internally, and if we have the opportunity, we will report back to you and your fellow commissioners on it.
Mr. Dodge, I'm sorry, Commissioner O'Donnell, could I add something as well?
Yes, ma'am.
So again, Tracy Townsend, Vice President. I think the difference here, Commissioner, is that we do have a focused effort on preventing any type of overpressurizations. They're just not included in the company's replacement program currently. In the fact that the stride was to enhance the pipeline safety and improve the reliability. Right now, the Optimain risk modeling is focused on leak avoidance, which is kind of the safety issue there, avoiding those leaks futuristically. And so that's why those projects are a higher risk based on kind of the leak performance of those segments of pipe. We did form a low pressure task force subsequent to the Massachusetts incident and participated in many of the industry activities and efforts around there. And we have made other improvements with coordinating construction around any of our low pressure to medium pressure stations. We've identified a buffer zone that we have incorporated in our damage prevention efforts for Miss Utility, including them in permits and others to highlight the dangers of working around what looks like a station that is confined to one area, but there are lines that go out and tie into other parts of the system that sense that pressure. And that was certainly a contributor to the Andover situation. So we'd be glad to provide some updates. I think we had started that task force when we were before the commission for our last base rate case, but we'd be glad to provide you a written explanation of all those other activities outside the STRIDE program that is also focused on preventing overpressurization events.
That'd be helpful. I think I've convinced myself, and you're not violating federal law or state law. I'm convinced of that, Mr. Dodge. And there probably are efforts that I'm not aware of. But I've convinced myself that this low pressure stuff just needs to go away as soon as possible in the state of Maryland because it's inherently dangerous, in my opinion. And no matter how many controls we put on it, administrative controls, it's inherently dangerous and it's anachronistic and it should be removed from our systems. That's my opinion. I'm not speaking for the commission, I'm speaking for myself.
I don't think you'll get any argument from us on your position, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's still good morning, Mr. Dodge. I was very supportive of the expanded scope of the STRIDE 2 and really would like to see the company succeed, but I'm having some of the same doubts that I think some of the other parties are having. But I guess what I really would like to understand are what particular risks or harms might be falling the customers, the ratepayers, because of a failure to meet this expanded scope that might not otherwise had if we were to look at maybe a more modest scope, such as, is there a premium we're paying? So, there are protections now with the rate cap and prudency reviews for expenditures. But I just recall during our hearings that there may be some other costs that were involved with going a little, further with the stretch program. So I'd be interested if you have any, or the company could answer that. And I'd also like to hear from our staff and from OPC if they believe that there are specific harms with this expanded scope that we're reviewing right now.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Ms. Townsend is going to be sorry she accepted my Outlook invitation because I'm going to put her back on the stand here in just a moment. But I can tell you that from a customer financial impact for the 2019 project year, I would categorize the risk impact as de minimis. We were authorized to spend $66 million, and we ended up spending $57 million. So I think there may have been some confusion from my last presentation in April that we were collecting $57 or $66 million from Maryland customers over 2019 through the surcharge. In fact, we collected about $2.4 million, which is the revenue requirement associated with the commission-approved $66 million. And as I said in my opening remarks, we should have collected about $1.9 million. So to the extent I left the impression that we are collecting tens of millions of dollars from Maryland ratepayers ahead of doing work or completing work, I apologize for that. That's on me. So in the 2019 context, the impact to customers was negligible, as I mentioned, $472,000, including interest. The typical Maryland residential ratepayer is being refunded 78 cents between now and the end of the year. That also includes interest. I would mark that as not a great concern from a financial perspective, the narrow financial perspective. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ms. Townsend, again, to look at some of those other risks or costs that you referenced.
Thank you, John. Commissioner Richard, Tracy Townsend, again, Vice President of Washington Gas. So as far as harm, as defined in risk mitigation or leak avoidance, certainly the work that we are targeting within STRIDE is meant to enhance pipeline safety and improve system reliability. And so it is not, we operate a safe and compliant system currently and respond to any type of odor calls or leak repairs required. So you know, our intention is to replace the pipe in advance of any increased or additional leak activities on those pipe segments. So it's proactive, and it's through the STRIDE mechanism. It is expedited. It matched, you know, kind of a funding and a commitment that we could make and get qualified resources to have these 5-year programs on top of our regular replacement activity as well. So again, there is, you know, no harm. It is not unsafe. And you know, the company's priorities are laid out on the project list, but we do other operations and maintenance functions as appropriate to provide that safe and reliable service to the customers and the ratepayers of the state of Maryland. So I don't see that there's any harm associated with that. And back to Mr. Dodge's response earlier, from a non-financial perspective of the program, the reconciliation mechanism, we do best effort to forecast the work. They calculate the rider surcharge, and then they reconcile it. And when customers are over collected, they receive interest. If we under collect, we don't receive the interest. We just get it reconciled back to the rider. So again, I think both from a customer safety perspective and a customer financial perspective, there is no harm in a delay of performing work currently.
Okay, so there is no premium necessarily that we're paying for this expanded scope over if we had a more modest scope such as STRIDE 1, like a per unit job cost.
No, no change just because of a larger project list. So the $58 million 2019, if our project total is, say, in the 60s, $60 million right now, there is no premium associated with that. The only time we would pay any type of increased cost is at contractor turnover, or if we see external things driving up our costs. But that is really just the time value of money. It's not a premium associated with the level of work. We did not buy qualified crews to be on our system. They were either under blanket unit-based contracts or competitively bid through a sourcing activity. So we did not buy any extra crews for this increased project list total.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I would add, Your Honor, if I might, this is John Dodge again. Using a sort of a word picture analysis, if we had been doing this level of replacement work under our regular replacement strategy and program, the cost would be the same. We use the same unit contracts and competitive bidding processes. So there is no difference between what we pay for X unit of STRIDE versus X unit of regular replacement. So the ratepayers are held exactly even as between a specialized program and the regular program.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Dodge. Mr. Cleaver, do you have any comments on this question or the answers you heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the opportunity. Good morning. I would just raise 2 points, Your Honor. Specifically to Your Honor's question, I don't think that it would be a premium associated with a large, so to speak, STRIDE program if the utility were delivering to customers roughly, you know, within a couple of percentage points of the plant that it represented. The customers would be provided for the costs that were provided. But the fact that we haven't seen that here is a big part of the concern. The reconciliation is a separate issue. To use a quick analogy, I mean, if I tell somebody, I'm going to get you 10 widgets from the store, it'll be around $20. Why don't you give me a $20 bill and I'll give you your change, or I'll ask you for a little bit more. And I come back from the store and I say, oh, it was only $18. You get $2 back. But then I hand the person 6 widgets. The person's going to say to me, you were supposed to get me 10. And I said, and if I responded to you, well, it was $18 and I gave you your $2 back. That's not responsive to the concern when the person's saying, you told me that you were going to give me this level of product for this cost, and it's significantly below that. So even if the company makes proper change, to continue the analogy, in its reconciliation filing, that doesn't change the fact that a representation was made to the commission and the stakeholders that a certain amount of plant would be provided within a certain budget, and it wasn't. Mr. Dodge mentioned the 86% figure. He said we only spent 86% of the budget. That has been the company's position as of June 5th. We got an updated reconciliation filing on June 5th. Prior to that, if you look at the March 16th letter and you do the math on the front, and even in staff's buck sheet filed just a couple of weeks ago, I think it's page 4 of staff's buck sheet, it reflects a 92% spend of the budget, and that's the number that we're coming up with. It's not clear to OPC how the company's now getting 86. The math wasn't, so to speak, wasn't provided in this updated filing of June 5th. So that's one concern of when a company has a stride plan that it's not delivering the goods, that there is a cost to customers that, the commission's approving this special privilege of advanced cost recovery before plant is used and useful from customers, and then the plant ends up costing a lot more than what is represented to the commission. And just the second point I would raise, Your Honor, in response to your question in a more general sense, and to harken back to my introductory comments, when we hear that the company had diminished its stride crew complement because it didn't know what the total amount of the surcharge would be, and then that directly resulted in these completion percentages lower than one would expect to see. The stride program, by a company putting such priority on the amount of the surcharge and the recovery and the bottom line, it could actually be counterproductive based on that treatment that has been revealed through that discovery response. That we did, while we at least temporarily eliminated some of our crews because we didn't know what the exact amount of the surcharge would be. Well, this is in theory the riskiest part of the company system. And the commission has never imposed a strict requirement that stride has to be every year your 20 riskiest project. But I think in the 9335 order, the commission's words were we would expect the stride program to address the riskiest part of the company's system. In theory, these projects that were identified for stride represent the greatest risk. But now we're hearing from the company in this instance, well, we didn't really get really underway until deep into the year because we didn't know what the amount of the surcharge would be. So it can be counterproductive from a safety perspective as well.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may respond. Go ahead, Your Honor.
Just one quick follow-up. I just wanted to just understand. So are you concerned that we don't have protections in place if the company doesn't meet its budget or it overspends on certain projects? Because at least I'm operating right now that we do have those protections in place. And I guess the concern I would have if we were to start scaling the program back is we're going kind of against what we want to have it happen. We want the gas company to succeed in getting these high-risk projects addressed. And so, again, that's why I was asking the question about, specific harms or, risks to ratepayers by having an aggressive scope as opposed to something more modest. Because, again, I think we have these protections in place at the recovery time. Is that?
Right. I mean, Your Honor, when you talk about protections, I mean, if you're referring to the reconciliation mechanism, that it is correct that will result in the surcharge properly reflecting what the company actually spent. But, you know, again, going back to my hypothetical, I don't, that's in my view, a separate issue as compared to the company not actually doing the asset replacements that it represented to the commission and that it would do, you know, for under the budget presented that was collected from customers. Those are two separate issues. I hope I'm answering your question.
I think so. Thank you.
Again, if I may, Your Honor, John Dodge on behalf of Washington Gas. For a few years now, OPC has thumped the tub that the company has made a binding promise to deliver a certain amount of projects completed at a certain amount of at a certain price. That's not what the STRIDE statute contemplates. That's not what the company has represented. We have an approved project list with estimated costs associated with them. Your Honor is exactly right that the protection is the reconciliation. That's the protection for customers. And again, I go back to my earlier analogy. If we were replacing these projects, this infrastructure, on a regular basis, there would be nowhere near the level of scrutiny on the unit cost or the overall cost. In the 86-year history of this company in front of the commission, regular replacements just aren't treated like this. And Mr. Cleaver repeats the error that we are somehow getting special treatment of our cost recovery here. Number one, the legislature has decided that issue. We do not pre-collect. We collect our estimated costs as the work is done. There was a Court of Appeals case that OPC lost on this. And I get that it's a compelling thing to keep arguing, but as I pointed out repeatedly today, $472,000 out of $57 million that we spent. 13 cents a month per customer for 6 months in Maryland. There simply is no harm to Maryland customers from what we undertook or failed to undertake in 2019. The dollars just don't show that. I'd also add on the crew compliment that Mr. Joe Cleaver he's a great attorney. He's a wonderful advocate in writing and before the commission. But he picks out one argument and goes with that, and he ignores our other answer in our lengthy response to OPC 16-1 about all the other events that cannot transpire until we have an approved project list. He harps on the reconciliation. We married the two in our original filing and here to say we cannot go out and get permits. We cannot start the engineering and design processes internally until we have an approved project list. We do not get out over our skis ahead of commission approval on these projects. And I suspect, Your Honor, if we did do that, if we took a risk and went out to some municipalities to try to get permits, we would be criticized for spending money up front for projects that hadn't yet been authorized. So we're doing the best we can here, Your Honor, but I think this absolute perfect foresight argument, or that we should have known how the regulatory calendars were going to coincide, is just unrealistic. And it's indicative of a lifelong opposition over the life of this program by OPC. Most of these questions have been answered. Now we're just looking, are there risks that would be evident to the commission and customers and others if we didn't do this? And the answer is yes. Our riskiest pipe would not get replaced as quickly. Are there financial harms to customers? No. The reconciliation makes sure that there are no financial harm to our Maryland customers. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I felt the need to speak up and correct a couple of the impressions that OPC was trying to convey.
No, thank you, Mr. Dodge, and I really appreciate your answer, although I do welcome John or Mr. Cleaver and OPC thumping the tub. I think they do bring us important information, so I asked them never to stop thumping the tub. But anyway, I have no more questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Commissioner Richard, I've heard enough speeches today on both sides of the argument. Washington Gas has shook my confidence with regard to some of its reporting and forecasts in the past. However, I am going to support staff's recommendation today to move forward and to accept the revised filing. That said, I think OPC has shined a light on some problems that we've seen in the past. Notwithstanding the fact that Mr. Dodge, you refer to these numbers as de minimis, whether they be small or large, I don't think, at least to this commissioner, that matters very much, whether it be 470,000 or 4.77 million. I do question whether or not Washington Gas withheld information or chose not to share it with the commission as we were going through the proceedings in 2019. And that would be concerning if true, but I'm not going to reach that point today. And it's not enough to push me over the line to ask for an order to show cause. However, on a prospective basis, what I'm going to ask, and with my fellow commissioners' indulgence, is that you, Washington Gas, respond to the outstanding requests made by Mr. Cleaver in the very last paragraph of his June 8th filing, and answer those questions on a prospective basis within 30 days. I don't think any of the commissioners on this panel will be forgetting this discussion the next time this comes around before us. And we'll want that information on hand. So I'd like that information to be filed in this case number, whatever this case number is.
9486, Your Honor, and we agreed to answer those. And just to reiterate and not speechify too much more, we didn't know those questions until we saw them in writing, and we had offered to answer anything that any party had, and will continue to do so.
Well, I think those are good questions. Those questions wouldn't change my my position today if I had the answers, but I think going forward, I think it's an important exercise to put Washington Gas through, so we don't see this again. And while I appreciate stretch goals, to the extent that you're not delivering the product to Maryland ratepayers, regardless of whether they're paying $1.80 or $2 a month, is a concern. So let me propose that in this motion, and we'll let the votes fall where they may. So I propose that we note the company's 2019 STRIDE report, that we accept the company's rates as revised by the reconciliation factor for filing with an effective date of July 1st, 2020, and that within 30 days, Washington Gas Light Company respond to the 4 outstanding questions as asked by Office of People's Counsel in their June 8th, 2020 filing. The vote begins with Commissioner Richard.
I associate myself with all the chairman's comments. Vote yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to vote, and then I'd like a brief second to explain my vote. I'm going to vote aye on the motion, but I think what we heard from Mr. Dodge doesn't explain the obligation of a monopoly utility under the Public Utility Article and the laws of the state to provide safe and reliable service, whether or not we have an advanced recovery mechanism or not. And that has always existed, and it exists today, whether or not we have STRIDE or don't have STRIDE. STRIDE was created as an advanced recovery mechanism, plain and simple. But the obligation to provide safe and reliable service to the citizens of Maryland resides with the utility, always has, and probably always will if things are done correctly. So I vote aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved. Before we conclude today, I'd just like to remind all of the PSC watchers that tomorrow we'll be having our annual Electric Reliability Conference. That will be starting at 10 a.m. We'll hear from the state's 6 largest utilities regarding their performance in terms of reliability metrics for calendar year 2019. This YouTube channel, 10 a.m. tomorrow. With that, this meeting is adjourned.